Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching Gulf Today on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines. US President Donald Trump has warned that Hamas would be disarmed quickly and perhaps violently if they resist following the recent Gaza peace deal. Trump has not provided further details on how the disarmament would occur or the methods the US might employ. Israel has confirmed the transfer of 4 more bodies of deceased captives from Gaza, which were handed over to the International Red Cross and are now with respective families. The Israeli government previously stated that it would limit aid trucks entering to Gaza to 300 trucks per day due to the slow pace of bodies transfers. Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara is set to visit Russia to meet President Vladimir Putin, marking his first official trip to Moscow. The visit aims to strengthen the legitimacy of Syria's transitional government following the ousting of the Bashar al-Assad regime in December. More than 12 civilians were killed in fresh clashes between Afghan and Pakistani forces, according to the Taliban. The fighting has erupted after Islamabad urged the Afghan Taliban to crack down on militants allegedly operating from Afghanistan. The United States and China have begun imposing port fees on each other's vessels, escalating their trade war. This comes as China exempted Chinese-built ships from its levies and sanctioned a South Korean shipbuilder, while President Trump moved to reduce China's dominance in maritime trade and boost U.S. shipbuilding. Ukrainian authorities have ordered the evacuation of 409 families, including 601 children, from 27 villages near the frontline city of Kupiansk amid intensifying Russian attacks. Meanwhile, blackouts swept Kyiv and other regions after network overloads and damage from previous strikes disrupted power and water supplies. Madagascar's military seized power after President Andry Rajoelina was impeached and fled the country following weeks of Gen Z-led protests and army defections, according to media reports. The mutiny, led by an army commander, came after Rajoelina defied calls to step down. The United Nations has warned that gang recruitment of children in Haiti is surging, with minors as young as 10 years old now making up to half of all gang members, according to UNICEF Regional Director Roberto Beans. He has told reporters that the UN will train armed personnel deployed to combat the gangs. Now we start from the Middle East. US President Donald Trump has reaffirmed that Hamas must disarm following the Gaza peace deal, emphasizing that they will either comply or face forceful disarmament. Let's listen in to what the US President has said.
We have told them we want to disarm, and they will disarm. And if they don't disarm, we will disarm them. And it'll happen quickly and perhaps violently. But they will disarm. Do you understand me?
Yes. You say
because
quickly.
everyone says, oh, well, they won't disarm. They will disarm. And I spoke to Hamas, and I said, you're going to disarm, right? Yes, sir, we're going to disarm. That's what they told me. They will disarm or we will disarm them. Got it?
While President Trump has acknowledged that Hamas would play a limited role in the short-term security process during Gaza's rebuilding, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned of severe consequences if Hamas fails to disarm, outlining a two-state demilitarization plan. Israeli authorities have identified the bodies of hostage U.S. President Donald Trump has reaffirmed that Hamas must disarm following the Gaza peace deal, emphasizing that they will either comply or face forceful disarmament. Let's listen in to what U.S. President has said.
Told them we want to disarm, and they will disarm. And if they don't disarm, we will disarm them. And it'll happen quickly and perhaps violently. But they will disarm. Do you understand me?
Yes. You say
because
quickly.
you always, everyone says, oh, well, they won't disarm. They will disarm. And I spoke to Hamas, and I said, you're going to disarm, right? Yes, sir, we're going to disarm. That's what they told me. They will disarm or we will disarm them. Got it?
Now for this discussion, we're joined by Mohammad Khatibi. He's a Middle East expert, joins us live from Tehran. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World. Mr. Khatibi, how do President Trump's warning and the ongoing violence in Gaza reflect the challenges of implementing a peace process in the Israel-Palestinian conflict here? Mr. Khatibi, could you hear me? Now we move on and we stay on this topic. Israeli authorities have identified the bodies of hostages Eitan Levi, Tamir Nimrodi, and Uriel Baruch, whose remains were returned from Gaza overnight. The Abu Kabir Institute of Forensic Medicine has confirmed the identifications, while one additional body has returned from Gaza is still undergoing the identification. Demonstrators have gathered in Tel Aviv to celebrate the liberation of all living hostages and to demand the return of the remaining deceased hostages under the terms of the ceasefire. Meanwhile, families of released hostages have thanked the President Trump's administration and urged pressure on Hamas to release the remaining bodies. Let's listen into what they have said.
Thank you to President Donald Trump and the entire Trump administration for their relentless efforts to bring Omri and the other hostages home. From the start, you made our cause your mission, stood with the families, and never give up. I call on the international community to keep pressure on Hamas. We will not stop our as family until all the remaining 24 hostages are home.
Heartfelt gratitude to President Donald Trump. Because of you, I'm alive. Thanks to you, I'm standing here today, and thanks to you, my little brother is finally home.
Now for this discussion, we are joined by Yossi Cooper-Wasser. He's an Israeli intelligence and security expert, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you, Yossi, for joining us again. Yossi, how do President Trump's warning and the ongoing violence in Gaza reflect the challenges of implementing the peace process phase 1?
Well, there are so many challenges in implementing this peace plan that we are expecting a lot of hurdles and obstacles on the way. But determination to move forward can overcome some of these obstacles and find a way to overcome others. The immediate obstacles are obvious. One is the difficulty Hamas has in returning the bodies of the deceased hostages. We have been receiving until now 7 bodies of hostages, and one body that nobody knows what is this body all about, and probably the wrong body. And we are facing the refusal of Hamas to disarm. And yes, what's happening right now when they execute their opponents in the Gaza Strip is one reflection of their intention to stay in power and to exert their power over the Gaza Strip for a long time. And I think President Trump has referred to that yesterday, as you showed a minute ago. And so did Prime Minister Netanyahu. We are not going to accept it. And if necessary, this is going to change by force. And this means resuming the military operations. Nobody wants it, but if Hamas insists on that, this might mean that. In the meanwhile, before going to military operation, we still have the tool of opening or not opening the Rafah crossing and allowing more or less aid to flow in an attempt to convince Hamas to disarm. But it's not going to be easy. Much depends also on the pressure put on Hamas by Turkey and Qatar, its both allies, to disarm. And I understand why Hamas doesn't want it, because they realize that, and this is the big issue here in the Middle East these days. They realize that if they disarm, it means that the 7th of October was a mistake. And they wouldn't like to admit that the 7th of October attack, the massacre of 7th of October was a mistake. Although everybody realizes that this is the case, even.
And Yossi, now can you also tell us are all bodies returned from Gaza?
Insist on staying in power.
Yeah. Yossi, is everybody back from the hostages? Are they back from Gaza to Tel Aviv?
All the living hostages are back. Their conditions are being checked by the doctors now, by the medical teams, but they are functioning, and grosso modo, I would say that they are in reasonable shape concerning the expectations of what's going to happen. All of them are walking, all of them are speaking. It's a relatively better situation than what we envisaged might happen. But still, many of them have gone through terrible torture and experienced terrible conditions while they were in captivity. And we hope that all of them will resume normal life soon.
And Yossi, what role do you think international organizations like United Nations, Red Cross should play in providing humanitarian assistance to Gaza and also those in Israel to cooperate with these organizations?
No, this is frustrating because because these international organizations did nothing throughout those 2 years in order to make sure that the hostages are given reasonable conditions while in captivity. It's the only function they had was to deliver them from the hands of Hamas to Israel. That was the only function of the Red Cross in this situation. This is really frustrating. Right now, we have the Red Cross and the UN organizations involved in shipping in the humanitarian aid for the Gazans living in the Gaza Strip. This role is problematic because many of them cooperate with Hamas, and we see that Hamas keeps taking over some of the shipments of humanitarian aid that come into the Gaza Strip. We hope this is a temporary situation until Hamas really is disarmed. But God knows how long this is going to take, considering the refusal of Hamas to do that.
And how significant is or was the role of public opinion and political pressure from Israel when making decisions about sanctions, aid, and opening border crossings with Gaza?
Well, I think it had limited impact. What made things move forward was the decision of Israel to launch the military operation in Gaza City. When Hamas realized that Israel is about to take over the Gaza City and remove it from power by force, this is when Hamas was ready to accept the plan presented by President Trump that goes in line with Israel's demands that all the hostages will be returned, that Israel will maintain some security control over Gaza, and that Gaza would not be a base for terror attacks in the future and would not be run by Hamas. These are the demands of Israel, and they were accepted by Hamas because of the military pressure first and foremost. On top of that, the international community pressure, especially when it was led by President Trump and supported by Hamas allies, Turkey and Qatar, convinced Hamas to accept the plan, and that enabled us to bring the war to an end, hopefully. We'll see whether Hamas really delivers. But if they do, this is going to be the end of the war. And this is what made the difference here. From President Trump's point of view, I think the international pressure and the growing isolation of Israel was maybe playing a role, but as he was trying to leverage that against Prime Minister Netanyahu. But I'm not sure that from an Israeli point, I don't think this played a major role, except for through the messages of President Trump.
Thank you, Yossi.
From Hamas' point of view, I think the international developments were hardening their position, made it more difficult to reach an end to the war because they were under the impression that they managed to take the international community and use it as a leverage against Israel. So why show any flexibility? Only the Israeli military operation forced them to show this flexibility that was expected.
Right. Thank you very much, Yossi, for joining us and sharing that insight. Now, we stay on this topic. The Israeli government has reportedly decided to cancel the Gaza sanctions planned for today. The sanctions were set to include limiting humanitarian aid and keeping the Rafah border crossing between Gaza and Egypt shut. The cancellation of sanctions has been announced after Hamas has handed the remains of 4 out of the 28 deceased hostages, expediting the return process. Meanwhile, according to Israeli state media, Israel is now set to reopen Gaza's Rafah crossing for humanitarian aid to reach the Palestinian territory. Additionally, 600 trucks of aid are set to be dispatched to the Gaza Strip by the United Nations. Now, for this discussion, we go back to Yossi Cooper-Wasser. He's an Israeli intelligence and security expert, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you, Yossi, for staying with us. Yossi, is there any role that GHF will play for distributing aid, or it's now up to UN and other international organizations to distribute aid?
I think the role of GHF is going to be very limited in the future because, according to the agreement, if this is going to be implemented on the ground, then the responsibility for distributing the aid is going to be in the hands of UN agencies. And so we don't need the GHF. I think we should keep them as an option if something goes wrong with the distribution by the UN. So there's going to be a possibility to resume the activities of GHF. But right now, it's not necessary.
Thank you, Yossi, for sharing that insight and staying with us throughout this topic. Now we move on and we stay in the Middle East. Syrian President Ahmad al-Shara will meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow, marking his first visit to Russia. The two leaders will discuss regional and international developments and ways that Syria and Russia can cooperate. According to the Syrian government, Shara would visit Russia despite the postponement of an Arab summit that he had planned to attend. Shara is set to hold talks on the continued presence of Russia's naval base in Tartus and its airbase in Hmeimim. He will also formally request the handover of Bashar al-Assad, a Russian ally, for the trials over alleged crimes against Syrians. Russia has attempted to preserve ties with Syria's new authorities, including the offering of Damascus for diplomatic support over Israeli strikes on Syrian territory. Now, for this discussion, we're joined by Mohammad Khatibi. He's a Middle East expert, joins us live from Tehran. Thank you very much, Mohammad, for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World. Thank you. Now, how do you view the growing alliance between Syria and Russia, particularly in terms of military cooperation with Russia's naval base in some states in Syria, and what implication do you think that could have for Israel?
So before the fall of Assad regime had very good relations with Russia, and there were naval bases by Russia there. And after fall of Assad, the al-Bashar government kept the promises that Assad was doing with Russia, and now we are seeing that their relation is growing because Syria needs Russian help to counter Israeli threats against its sovereignty. And also, there are many players in Syria that align with Russia, and the Syrian government, the current government, needs to address those groups. For example, in Alawites in Syria are more aligned with Russia, and to keep control on them, the Syrian government should be cooperating with Russia. Also, the government is eager to diversify its alliances, so it's not just the US that it wants to grow, and it wants to be normalized as a country. For example, it may resume ties with Iran, which this government is very keen to push the aligned groups out of Syria, but it is now trying to help people in Syria and is trying to continue what is left of Assad regime.
And also, given the Syria has formally requested the handover of Bashar al-Assad for trial over also alleged crimes, how do you think Sharaf moving forward will be talking, or what will be in the table for these discussions in the upcoming Putin and his summit?
I don't think that Russia will hand over Bashar al-Assad. There was a report about assassinating him, but I think he is still alive, Bashar al-Assad, I mean, and Russia has good relations with him, and it will continue to be so. There will be talks on return, but I don't think that Russia is willing to hand over Assad to the current government. So moving forward, the Syrian government wants to normalize with all its neighbors, including Israel. So this is not a case with Iran right now, but eventually it will normalize relations with Iran also, because the government wants peace, as been seen, and it has changed course during these months. But we should not forget that this government was formed from extremists and Al-Qaeda members. Bashar was an Al-Qaeda leader, and then he changed course and started to be more pragmatic, and is trying to push out the extremist groups in his government to a side and be a normal country. But I don't think that this will happen in short term. There are other important issues. For example, Israel is continuing to attack Syrian sovereign territory over different issues like the Druze community in Syria, and that is a really big problem for Syria because it wants to retain its sovereign territory, and Russia can help Syria to retain sovereign territory and counterbalance Israel. Syria has good relations with Turkey also, and I think the Russian help will counter Israel and help the whole government in Syria to fight back against Israeli territorial claims.
And lastly, with President al-Sharat's visit marking his first trip to Russia, what do you think are the potential effects of this increased cooperation between Syria and Russia on the broader Middle Eastern landscape?
So I think that the Bashar government wants to normalize with its neighbors, including Iran, and I think this is a good step forward for Bashar government to normalize with Iran, I think the relations with Iran will also be on the table, because Israel is attacking Syria, and Syria wants to counter the threats by Israel, and this will help, and this will also help the people in Syria, which have suffered years of civil war, and now there is a very big divide in Syrian society among the Kurds, among the Arabs, and among the Alawites, because they are now cooperating with each other, but there is a big divide.
Sorry, we seem to have lost our guest here, but thank you very much, Mohammed, for joining us all the way from Tehran and sharing that insight. Now we move on. An exclusive investigation has uncovered a secret 2-year operation by the Assad government to move thousands of bodies from a mass grave in Qutaifa, Syria, to a remote desert site near Dumair. The operation, called Operation Move Earth, aimed to cover up the regime's brutal crimes and restore Assad's international legitimacy. Witnesses, including truck drivers and former military officers, revealed that the operations continued from 2019 to 2021, with up to 8 trucks transporting remains nearly every week. The new mass graves, spanning 2 kilometers, could hold tens of thousands of victims from the Syrian civil war. The current government has not responded to this investigation as of yet. Now, for this discussion, we're joined by Professor Vasilin Popovsky. He's a professor and vice dean at Jindal Global Law School. Joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Professor. Good to see you again. Now, how do you view this growing alliance between Syria and Russia, and also the Syrian regime trying, not current, but the previous regime trying to gain back the reputation of its leader, Bashar al-Assad?
Well, we know that Putin and Bashar al-Assad were very close, and they committed together all the crimes against humanity and war crimes in Syria. Russia is using its own air force for many of the bombings where many civilians died over those 9 years of civil war. So basically 2 big war criminals, Putin and Bashar al-Assad, and kind of ironically being in the same city. Bashar al-Assad is hiding in Moscow and trying to avoid the obvious investigation and prosecution which will follow one day. When Putin is gone, I'm sure, even if not before, he will be surrendered for prosecution, and Syrian people will decide his sentence. So I don't see this as it's a normal visit, it's diplomatic. 2 countries have diplomatic relations. At some point, they are meeting on high level. But there is no alliance between Syria and Russia, because the new government in Russia is very much against Bashar al-Assad, and effectively will demand Bashar al-Assad to be surrendered to face prosecution. And here the role of Russia is somehow problematic, because they were so close to Bashar al-Assad, committing those crimes together. And obviously now they will do the twist, and they will try to be also friendly to al-Shara and to kind of say that we can help the future of Syria, to be also protected from potential Israeli attack and all that. And it is normal for Putin to try to play those manipulative games with everybody, somehow to survive himself, because he's the next to go. He's the next Bashar al-Assad. There will be a discovery of mass graves in Russia one day when he's gone, when millions of Russians suffer and soldiers die in Ukraine, and he needs a lot to hide himself. So what Bashar al-Assad did in 2019 and 21, it is again absolutely horrific story of removing dead bodies from one mass grave to another, just to hide them and not to be exposed. But that's what murderers do. That's what aggressors do. That's what war criminals like Putin and Bashar al-Assad do. And more we dig into that, more we find out about those horrific crimes they committed. So it's a curious thing because al-Sharaa will demand the surrender of Bashar al-Assad, but obviously Putin will try to avoid it. Yes.
And it seems like it's such a big, like a white elephant between this Syria's new regime and Russia trying to cooperate for future, but then knowing that Bashar al-Assad was supported by Russian regime. How do you think these ties will be moving forward? Also about military presence, the continued military presence, and the continued support by Russia for Assad. How does this alliance complicate the diplomatic efforts to resolve the Syrian conflict?
Well, Assad is gone. He's already nobody here. The new regime needs to, yes, get all the issues, including the security issues, in hand. They need to show respect for rules, for international law, for human rights. And these are the question marks, obviously, because al-Sharaa still need to do a lot of work domestically to prove that he's a legitimate leader who respects rule of law and human rights. And for that matter, he will look much different from the all previous regimes in Syria, hopefully one day. And for Putin, there is no escape anymore. He's, as I said, a criminal, an aggressor, a mass murderer. So he will try to please al-Sharaa and somehow to try to establish some links with the new government of Syria, promising maybe money, promising some support, and all other but the Syrians are independent state with their own national agenda, and they shouldn't really listen much to Putin. It will be, I think, a courtesy meeting, what we call in the diplomatic relations, shaking hands, photo opportunity, but nothing more than that, because Putin will be gone 1 year from now. He will not be alive, or he will be in prison in the same way as Bashar al-Assad should be. So there is not much future in Putin in Russia, as well as in Bashar al-Assad anywhere in the world, including in Syria.
Thank you very much, Professor Veselin Popovsky, for joining us again and sharing that insight on this topic. Now we move on. The United Nations peacekeeping mission in Lebanon has warned its operations could be disrupted following a 25% cut in UN personnel worldwide after the United States slashed its funding. According to a senior UN official, thousands of peacekeepers may be withdrawn from key hotspots in the coming months as Washington adjusts its contributions under President Donald Trump's America First policy. The U.S. has contributed over a quarter of the UN's peacekeeping budget, but now plans to pay only half of its $1.3 billion share, forcing the organization to scale back operations globally. And that's a wrap on Gulf Today. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.